Hello and welcome to Lore Watch, a roundtable freeform discussion about lore and our favorite media. I'm your host, Joe Perez, one of several lore-focused folks from Blizzard Watch, and I've got my marvelous co-host with me today, Matt Rossi. How are you doing today, Matt?
Well, I just spent a lot of time making friends with a whole bunch of pirates and then betrayed them all to the system government in a bloody battle that culminated at the end of the whole deal, where I had to disarm nuclear reactors that were overloading and then, kill the dude who was in charge of the place. And he was like, I was good to you. And I'm like, yeah, actually, you were much better to me than any of the people on my side, but you really shouldn't have attacked me at the beginning of the game. I hold grudge. So that's been me.
This sounds like Starfield.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I haven't done anything with any bands of pirates, though I have started replaying through Cyberpunk 2077 in preparation of Phantom Liberty, which be coming out.
I've got all my stuff saved already. I've got like a bunch of level 50s. I've got a bunch of levels indeterminates that are like ready to go. Yeah, I'm set for Phantom Liberty.
Yeah.
I figure once Phantom Liberty drops, I'm going to be doing that for a while. So yeah, I'm trying to get as much Starfield in as I can up front.
Which is totally fair. And I think I'm going to be... I started yet another playthrough in Baldur's Gate 3 because I'm a monster. And just need to continue to play that game because that's what we're doing. But I'm still playing WoW because of course we are. And we're going to be answering questions. And again, if you have questions for this podcast or any of our podcasts, I want you to go ahead and send them in. They can be about other games as well. They don't always have to be about Blizzard IPs. We do play other games. So if you have questions about the story of those games, feel free to send those in as well. You can hit us up at podcast@blizzardwatch.com, singular podcast at blizzardwatch.com. Specify the show that it's for in the subject line, please, so that we can go ahead and make sure it gets to the right place. You can also hit us up on Discord. If you are not a Patreon supporter, we have a Q and podcast questions channel where we do look for questions. And if you are a Patreon supporter, as a way of saying thank you, in addition to getting all of our content ads free and in advance, we tend to look for your questions first in this particular channel. It's the Patreon Q and podcast channel. You can just basically, do the same thing. Tell us what show you want it to be for, and then ask your question, and we'll be more than happy to take them. As a matter of fact, if you send some more in, I would be very, very happy. We've sort of hit a lull, and I would like more. All right, but we're going to start with a question from Razorbug or Razorberg. Depending on how I feel like it this week, we're going to go with Razorbug.
Now it's time for Razorberg to shine.
Hail those what do lore watch. While I did play Warcraft 1, 2, and 3, and I can only claim to really know any lore from WoW, maybe I was lost in between inserting disc 8 of 16 in my IBM 386. Oh my god, I understand that reference. Oof. I did...
I'm playing Sid Meier's Pirates sometime. It was on one disc, but my god, it was on a giant floppy disk.
Civ 4. If it did make me think. We've burned through the majority of old big bads from Warcraft past, notwithstanding the void we have to touch on every time. Who, what, a few expansions down the line, would you bring back to be a big bad from deep Warcraft history that we have totally forgotten about? Who would you shock everyone with the reveal of? Our fussing about in Shadowlands and the Jailer's Private Collection gives carte blanche on returning dead characters, so what niche thug would you have come back as Cosmic Threat, and how would you do that? So, I don't know, Matt, what do you think?
Blackhand.
Explain.
Warchief Blackhand.
Okay.
Rend and Maim's dad. Blackhand, who's the first Warchief of the Horde. Blackhand. Bring that guy back.
Okay, this is where I am going to encourage you to give more because this is an audio format. And
I understand. I don't think it really requires a lot of thought. He is as unambiguous a villain as one gets. And plus, he's a dupe. He wasn't ever really in charge. He thought he was, but meanwhile, the Shadow Council and Gul'dan were doing whatever they felt like in the background. And Blackhand was just like, whatever. I'm going to go do the various horrible things to do. I don't think he actually talked like that. He was much more of gruff and orcish, but I can't do an orc right now. I just think WoW could use a guy who just does the bad stuff that needs to happen in order for the game to proceed. We need the Horde as we have it now has been going through a trajectory that has basically taken it from like the villain to anti-heroes to conflicted to right now still trying to feel out what's going on with the Alliance and all that stuff. we could use actual bad guys again. Straight up, just doing the wrong thing for the wrong reasons, guys. And gals, yeah. I mean, they'd be helpful too. And I think Blackhand would be a really good pick. He's malleable. If you bring him back, he doesn't have to act exactly the same way. Being dead for a while does kind of mess you up. And he could come back as some kind of Death Knight like thing. Maybe he's working for the true villain of Shadowlands, the Primus. I don't, lots of possibilities. But at his core, Blackhand is absolutely, completely uncomplicated. He wants to be in charge. He wants to be powerful. He wants to have a lot of, sex. Like straight up, he has 5 kids. He does what he wants to do. He's id. He is id unleashed. And sometimes that's good for a story. You don't always have to have everybody be deep and introspective and full of secret yearnings and conflicted allegiances. Blackhand's only allegiance is to himself. He isn't the most evil orc by a long chalk. That's always going to be Gul'dan. Gul'dan wins that one every time. It's not even close. The next most evil orc after Gul'dan is, people who worked for Gul'dan. Ner'zhul is not even in the top 50 because Ner'zhul wasn't evil.
No, he originally was a dupe.
Yeah. And he basically got more and more desperate trying to save his people until he burned so many bridges and done so many things. He didn't know what, and then he got grabbed and, stuck into a suit of armor as part of a complex plan.
And then he didn't share the space with some whiny aristocrat. And
yeah, the whole thing just, if Ner'zhul came back, I'd actually feel bad for him. I would want him to get a break. But Blackhand doesn't have the sweeping grandeur of a Gul'dan who is literally cackling on top of a spire while holding the skull of someone in his hands. You know what I mean? His own skull in some cases. He never actually held skull. But Gul'dan's got kind of a grandeur and epic sweep to him. He's like the Shang Tsung of Warcraft. He's just, everybody hates this guy. No, even people who work with him don't like him. Blackhand is not that. Blackhand is basically he's just an orc who was never particularly far thinking. He was never particularly his biggest sin was being chief of a tribe. A clan that had Orgrim Doomhammer in it, who made him look bad in every conceivable way. Everything that Blackhand wasn't good at, Doomhammer was good at. Having him for a second in command must have been infuriating. It's like Spock times 1,000. Spock is good at most everything, and he kind of makes Kirk look a little weak at times. But Kirk's got his strengths, and he's good, he's quippy, and he's good at improvisation. There's a good teammate there. There's no good teammate with Doomhammer and Blackhand. Blackhand is inept and short-sighted and a fool and evil. And Doomhammer is for an orc at the time, noble and thinks about his people first and isn't corrupted by power or bloodlust or actual demon blood. There's a story in contrast here. It's almost a shame to imagine what would happen to Blackhand if he didn't have Doomhammer.
Yeah.
To hate and to need at the same time, because he hates this guy because it makes him look, he's constantly aware that everybody thinks, why isn't that guy in charge? But at the same time, he needs him because he is just not very good at the job. You could have a lot of fun with Warhammer who suddenly doesn't have that and is having to come up with his own plans. Imagine if he found out he was actually okay at it. The biggest problem was that he just never tried.
Yeah.
That'd be interesting.
Yeah.
He'd be sitting there going,
didn't we kind of get a little bit about that in Warlords of Draenor?
Well, yeah, but that's Warlords of Draenor, where things are, the rules, the rules don't make sense, and everything's made up.
We got to see a little bit of it. We got to see glimmers of what that would look like what him untethered, more or less, would
what
look
him
like.
Actually trying would be, yeah. And he was doing okay. He wasn't war chief in that version, but as the head of the
Iron Horde.
Yeah. No, he wasn't head of the Iron Horde.
He became the head of the Iron Horde at the end, didn't he? When we fought him.
Remember? No. That's that. All the time up until he got captured by Gul'dan, Grom was head of the Iron Horde.
Oh, I'm thinking of Blackhand. Sorry.
Yeah, Blackhand. Yeah, Blackhand was never head of the Iron Horde. He just was their weapons guy. But it's Blackhand. It's just fascinating to see him as a figure. Like he was competent in Warlords, and I think to a certain degree that's because he didn't have anybody manipulating him. Like Gul'dan played to his ego. Gul'dan played, Gul'dan. If anybody knows how to lie to people, it's Gul'dan.
Oh yeah,
you know
100%.
This is a dude who is well aware of how to lie. I feel like I've been going on for a long time on this one, and I really could go on and on about why Blackhand is effective, but I'd like to let you talk about yours.
Yeah, so this is one of those ones that I've kind of rattled around for a couple weeks now because, Razorbug, I don't know that I really want to look to the past anymore. And the reason I say that is because one of the most exciting things for me is when loose ends do get tied up quite a bit. I enjoy that. I enjoy when the long-term goal or the long-term storytelling has a big payoff. And we've had a lot of that over the last few years. There is one that hasn't really been sealed up yet. And anybody who tells me that it has, I will disagree with you vehemently. And that's Azshara. Azshara is still a wild card. She is the most powerful villain on Azeroth that we still have to deal with at some point, and yet just have not. The entire last expansion, we were in the Land of the Dead, and she was doing things. This one, we're on the Dragon Isles, and we know that she's doing things there as well, because there's Naga everywhere. There's caves that are filled with them. They're looking for something just as much as we are. We still don't know what it is, but she knew that the Isles existed. And therefore, she's still active. She knows what's going on around the world right now. And I enjoy her because she is so intelligent as a villain. One of the things that I think Warcraft villains have suffered from in the past, in particular, is sort of the mustache twirling villain effect, where characters who are normally deep or have a lot to offer in regards to the depth of their intelligence are sort of reduced down to sort of weird comic book or cartoon-esque plans. And I'll throw Sylvanas in there because unfortunately I think that while I really liked the character and I liked the idea of her as a complicated villain, her stuff got a little too cartoony at the end. And so towards the end of Shadowlands, it just didn't have the same weight. When we're going to fight her in the Sanctum, it didn't feel the same. It didn't have that same sort of gravitas, if anything, at least in my opinion. Still good storytelling, just not necessarily the big bad villain. But Azshara, on the other hand, talk about somebody who's loyal only to herself. Talk about somebody who, just craves power. And we've talked about her a few times in the last few weeks. It's one of those things where it's almost never enough power for her. I mean, heck, Sargeras might have been, maybe, possibly, been an okay mate for her because he maybe was on an equal playing field. And that's not something you say to a Titan or somebody of that magnitude unless you are absolutely positively certain of your power. And we have no idea what she's been doing. Technically, and I'm air quoting this, she's free of N'Zoth. We don't know if she is or isn't, but there's a chance that with N'Zoth having to be doing whatever he's doing, that she may be free of his influence or have figured out how to free herself of his influence. She has a ton of artifacts and she's definitely been gaining power still. I'd like to see that come to a head. We talked a couple months ago at this point about an all-elf expansion culminating in, fighting Azshara or the forces being opposed to them. I'd still like to see that. I'd like to see the elves being forced to come together and work with each other on a professional level, not maybe necessarily everybody singing Kumbaya or anything like that, but just listen, we have a bigger problem. We can deal with this later, but right now she is going to basically destroy everything if we don't deal with it. And I don't trust the other races to deal with it because this is our problem. We made it. Let's go take care of this. I'd be okay with that. The other one that I've been thinking about a lot are essentially Void Ethereals. We had a little thing with Void Ethereals back when we got Void Elves as part of the expansion.
Brief mention of them in the Legion stuff.
There's a brief mention of them, but when we got there, and we got to the I think it was, what is it,
it's one of the Argus zones, but I don't remember.
The Telagris Rift, I think it was. Where we get there and there's a bunch of Void Ethereals, essentially the Netherguard, which was led by Prince Durzan, who is attacking Magister Umbric and his followers, trying to transform them into ethereals. We have not talked about that. You can transform other creatures into ethereals? Question mark? What does that mean? What does that mean for all? We know that ethereals transcended into the current form that they are in from their home planet when things went sideways. We've never actually explored that process. And you talk about all the voidy things. There's an entire cult, essentially, of void walkers or void ethereals out there that need to be dealt with. We don't know who is necessarily still running them. I don't know if I necessarily trust locust walkers still. And talking about how that is just such a cool, unexplored space that if we start dealing with anything more with the void, which it seems like we're being set up to do, thanks to some of the current, mild spoilers, some of the current dungeon content that we've experienced that sort of set up Eridikron and what he's planning to do and who he's working with, void is going to become a thing again. It's going to be something we have to deal with. I'd like to explore this a little bit more. I'd like to explore a little bit more of what it means to be a void elf, how close they are to accidentally becoming ethereals or void ethereals at the point. I'd love to see that, and then deal with sort of the fallout from Koresh, because we still haven't really dealt with that either. We know it exists. We've seen it. When we were doing the Astromancer fight, we see Koresh confirmed in multiple interviews that one of the void planet that was being swallowed by void tendrils that we saw was Koresh. We haven't dealt with that at all yet either. There's so many of these cool little things that we could seize upon and explore. And I really would love to spend some time doing that. And the last one, and I'm going to say this because I think it is, to me, would be very, very interesting. I would like to see alternate Yrel become a big bad. Not because I don't like Yrel, but because it's a very interesting design space to me. Villains wielding light. I would really like to see how that would work, because we keep talking about the light as like this wonderful, righteous thing. And Matt and I have pointed out over the years, you don't have to be good to wield the light. You just have to be an empty vessel. Even when we're fighting a corrupted Anduin, when he's got, Arthas's soul operating like a control center for him, when he's doing the jailer's bidding, he's still wielding the light. He's using the light against us. Yrel is doing this very fanatic crusade or onslaught that reminds me a lot of the Scarlet Crusade and the Scarlet Onslaught. Bring that back at a cosmic scale. Make it so that she is a problem and that we have to deal with it, and then deal with the moral ramifications of what that means to all these characters that have seized upon the light as something that means pure, holy, or righteous, or goodness, and then how they deal with the fallout of it being used for something awful, or for being just something that is diametrically opposed to their moral compass. These, to me, these three ideas are more interesting than resurrecting any past villain we've experienced. And I would much rather start moving in those directions and start picking up those little threads than outside of Azshara, because she is just eternally wonderful, than maybe resurrecting any of the ones that have passed from this world or are gone forever. So those are my picks. I don't know if you have anything else to add to that one, Matt.
No, it's going to be Blackhand.
Maybe Blackhand is a Void Orc. Ooh,
Vork.
A Vork.
No, right. I mean, in all sincerity, I don't think it's going to. After all that good talk you did, I felt like I had to say something not good, so I did.
All right, well, hopefully that answers your question, Razor. We're going to move on to our next question here. And this one comes from Cariana, a Night Elf Druid obsessed with lore and this podcast. Well, thank you. I'm listening to some episodes from BFA era, and you talked a lot about the Hour of Twilight. I'm starting to wonder, with Dragonflight having the looming threat of Galakrond, what if Galakrond returning is the Hour of Twilight? Deathwing was the catalyst to the dragons returning to the Dragon Isles, along with many other events, and discovered more about Tyr and what he did to Galakrond. The dragon aspects talk about how stopping the Hour of Twilight was one of their purposes, and Tyr raised them to aspect level after Galakrond. What if Tyr knew Galakrond could return? What if, now that we have another black aspect, the Hour of Twilight will begin? What if stopping the Hour of Twilight helps them get their aspect powers back? forgive me if there's more story about this in game. I'm a little behind the main story points. That's okay. There's a ton of stuff this expansion to catch up with, but I don't think you've missed anything too terribly like out there that would change your view here. But I'm going to turn it over to Matt so he can talk for a little bit, because I know he loves Galacrond, and I'm air quoting that.
You're air quoting Galacrond?
That you love it.
Why would you? Why would you
love
do that?
Galacrond?
You love Galacrond. Yeah, okay. Who do you actually mean? If you don't, anyway, I'm gonna have to move past that. Joe's weird air quoting. I gotta think. No. Get on the subject. I don't think we've heard anything definitive yet. Like, the only time we've seen much about Galacrond is in the time travel dungeon. There hasn't been a lot of, this is what Tyr actually did. Here's the concrete deets. Here's, we know that Tyr was doing something with the water from the font of water that, is currently being used in the life pools and so forth. He was doing something with that water, and he was trying to give power to Galacrond, who was the oldest and strongest member of his group, and therefore, at least in Tyr's experimental view, was a good test subject for this possibility to try and bring order to dragons who were elementally chaotic by nature. Clearly, Yogg-Saron sprinkled some badness juice in there. We know that from this expansion. We found that out in Uldaman of places. But we don't, whatever Iridikron is doing, we don't know what it is. Like, he got the essence of Galacrond, but we don't know how he plans to use that. Like, what is Iridikron's end game? We don't know. We don't know what he's trying to do. He kind of went to the jailer's school of, keep doing your plan, don't stop and explain. Like, I'm a little annoyed that these villains have apparently gotten the Evil Overlord book, and they're like, oh, right, okay, don't do anything not on the list. Great, I can't brag about my plan. Dang, I still love bragging about my plans, but I can't. Not even when it's useful exposition. I don't think there's anything that would stop what you're saying from being the case. There's no current thing in game where you're like, well, that can't happen because Galacron's been converted to the side of good now. Man, that'd be a really weird meeting. The aspects all standing essentially on Galacron's back because Galacron was as big as all of them put together. Like, what do you think Galacron's mortal form would look like? Would he have one of the really weird ones that the proto-drakes are taking? I'm asking you, Joe.
I don't know.
Like, but to get back to it, there's nothing in the game that says what you're saying it couldn't happen. I don't think that's where they're going. That's just not the feeling I get from it. That they're going to reveal, the actual Hour of Twilight. Now, for one thing, that retroactively makes the previous thing that they did not seem cool. Like, standing and stopping the Hour of Twilight, that was a big victory. It was a this is a triumph, to quote GLaDOS. I'm making a note here, huge success. Then having it come, that this is the Hour of Twilight. That was just the lead up. That was the warm up to the Hour of Twilight. It makes, not just the aspects themselves, but all those mortals that help them look kind of dumb. And that's why I don't think they're going to do that. I'm certain they're going to reference the Hour of Twilight. I'm sure that it absolutely plays a role in what's happening now. But I don't think it's just going to be, it turned out that, Tyr, when they said this with the Hour of Twilight, they meant now. Because then that just sets up the precedent that when something else bad starts happening, that'll be the Hour of Twilight. The Hour of Twilight will always be happening in the future. It will always be, we've always been at war with Europa. We've always been in the Hour of Twilight. So that's my gut reaction to what you're saying. But in terms of in-game lore, there is nothing technically stopping them from deciding that would be what they wanted. There's no missing pieces that would make it not happen.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I think we talked about this when we did a talk about the dragons in general, and we had our I think 4 or 5 episodes about just dragons. You can go back and listen to it. The Hour of Twilight is one of those things where it's open-ended enough that they can do stuff like this if they wanted to. They could bring it back to Galacron. They could bring it back to the Void and everything that's happening now. But my personal opinion is that the Hour of Twilight has already come and gone, right? So the Hour of Twilight was something that was prophesized and prophesized by the, I believe it was the Prophet of Twilight, which turned out to be Archbishop Benedictus, who had made a deal with some old god. I forgot which one, if they ever said which one it was.
Well, the ones that were attacking Wormrest Temple and the ones that were in charge of Deathwing were servants of N'Zoth.
So then he very clearly, then he would have made a deal with N'Zoth.
I mean, for that matter, though, it's not like it would, if he had made a deal with Cthulhu. I mean, Cthulhu is just as happy to make things crazy and chaotic as anybody else. Like if you've watched, like you remember when we were actually during Cataclysm for that matter, Cho'Gall was invoking Cthulhu the whole time. Like the master he was talking about was Cthulhu. It wasn't Azeroth.
Well, and plus the interesting thing is, I still think this is the case. I think Archbishop Benedictus started his descent into madness way back in original WoW when we brought him the Cursed Eye of Paleth and he cleansed it. Oh, and I'm air quoting cleansed it when we got it out of Razorfen Downs because, well, I mean, it's a cursed eyeball. It could be N'Zoth, it could have been Cthulhu, it could be a number of things, but I'm sure that started. Regardless, going back to the Hour of Twilight, the Hour of Twilight is.
Oh, dude, you gotta stop. I'm sorry, but you just made me think of something.
Go for it.
Razorfen Downs.
Yeah.
Razorfen Downs there were like a ton of undead attacking it, and so they were making deals with elementals, right?
Mm-hmm.
To try to stave off the undead. And what was showing up? What kind of besides elementals, there were also twisted creatures and the big monsters, right?
Yep, there were the big monsters. There's also a plague going on as well.
But I meant like the big pig monsters. They had giant pigs as well as the other stuff.
Yeah.
Or am I thinking Downs or Crawl? It doesn't matter. They're both basically and the Quillbore. This is the Quillbore tribes, and they were tapping into Agaman. Yeah, and that just made me think of Razorfen Downs, and that made me think of Black Fathom Deeps, where the Naga are, and this is right around the same time. Whilst the old gods are corrupting places. All around, there's actually a place in the Barrens. Oh man, I can't remember the name of it. The Wailing Caverns? Yeah, the Wailing
Caverns.
Wailing Caverns has the same problem as Black Fathom Deeps does. It has Hydra, and Hydra are sacred to the old gods because of Yeshaj, who was the one with all the heads. And so, looking at Razorfen Downs, looking at Razorfen Crawl, looking at the obvious old god corruption that's taking place and opposing the necromancy deal, and then you look at Black Fathom Deeps and Wailing Caverns where there's hydras everywhere. And how far away is Wailing Caverns from Razorfen? It's just on the other side. It's just on the other side of the Barrens. So I'm starting to wonder. You remember like the last time we were talking about the old time theory about there possibly being 5 old gods in total, and the map people keep drawing and so forth?
Yeah, of course.
What if it's not that there's 5 old gods, there's one we never heard of? What if an old god we have heard of is going to come back?
Well, I'm confident that will happen.
No, but the one that will be coming back, it's entirely our direct fault because he was killed, air quotes, but his heart was kept buried, and then his heart got out and was being used by an orc war chief over in Durotar, and then we destroyed that apparently, although we don't know how we did it. Like there's nothing when you interact with it, it melts into goo, and there's nothing about how that happened or what you did to it, if anything. And now you've got those hydras, you've got the corruption. What Kalimdor, the part of Kalimdor that is the Barrens and that whole region, it's on the coast. It's towards where the Well of Eternity would have been. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And what is the Well of Eternity if not the essential murder site of Yisraj? It's where Yisraj was killed. Like we know about Yisraj because the Shah are all over Pandaria, but Pandaria is not the only place that was touched by the Well of Eternity. The Well of Eternity touched every part of Azeroth, and it was Yisraj's death place. And yet we know they can't actually die. They're like the Titans that way. They can't go to the Shadowlands. They don't have an existence that allows them to be part of the cycle. They talk about cycles a lot. 5 torches, 5 lanterns to light our way. Yisraj was stuck in the earth, the soil, and the rock of the world. So much so that when Amantul tried to pick him out of it, he just ripped him into pieces, and those pieces fell everywhere. I remember we were talking last week about how those world trees were being used to try and purify it, try and clean it all up. What if the thing Il'gynoth was trying to be was the way back for Yisraj as a tree? Because it had deep roots into the earth, and it was ripped out of the ground. He's trying to, the old gods are like literal corruption here, and hydras are sacred to them, and changing things is sacred to them. And all those dungeons are like right near each other. Razorfen Downs and Crawl are like just across. Like I think it's like like you get on your horse, you ride for like 5 minutes, and boom, there's the other dungeon. Wailing Caverns is not much further. It's just outside the crossroads. It's maybe a 5 to 10 minute ride. And Blackfathom Deeps, which is harder to get to from those areas, is still not very far in terms of actual distance. It's on the coast, and it goes over. If Y'Shraj was this big central force in Kalimdor at the time, it would make sense that his influence is being felt in that area. And it would make sense in terms of where we've seen that the other old gods are. Because we know that up in Ulduar, that's where Yog's remains are being kept submerged. We only saw a tiny bit of him in the brain room. His tendrils went through all of Northrend. The whole place was just infested with Yog. Their bodies are enormous, and we've barely seen like little projections of them.
And like even with Cthulhu, we've been in like Cthulhu's stomach. But yeah, I'm with you on that one.
So what if all of this, everything the old gods are doing, it's not out of loyalty to him, it's not out of respect for him, it's out of use of his power. The last time they fought the Titan, they lost because Y'Shraj was basically in charge and he wasn't capable of leading a defense. At least in the other old gods would probably think so anyway. But his power was undeniable. He was more powerful than any two of the others. And that has me thinking about everything you just said, just made that pop into my head, is that idea of, wait a minute, this is all in Y'Shraj's territory. Like, we know where Cthulhu was. He's down in the south, right?
Right.
We know where Yog was. Yog's up north. We know where N'Zoth was. He's essentially over in what's now Ocean. N'Zoth's region was in the places that got subducted. So he was underneath the Night Elf Empire the whole time. He was underneath the original Kaldorei Empire, the one that was led by Azshara. That's why he contacted Azshara, because she was right there. He was just biding his time. And that makes me think, remember we talked last week about what the golden eyes signified, what they meant, and how they might come to be? Like, is that, are you hearing the whispers of Azeroth? N'Zoth would be, he's listened to the whispers of Azeroth before. Hell, his entire plan in Battle for Azeroth was to use the Azerite to sow chaos, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Azerite is literally, it's Azeroth's blood, but Azeroth isn't it's not like a physical baby the way we were describing it. That's a metaphor for what it is. The Azerite is power. It's usable by anybody, and it's certainly usable by the old gods. In fact, that's why they were sticking themselves into the planet. They were feeding on it. When we talked about the Khajiit and the goblins and the trolls and the effects that Khajiit was having on the goblins, and how the goblins were initially created by, of all people, Mimiron. And Mimiron was a Titan construct, but one that had gone completely off the rails when he died and was recreated in a different body. And that means, remember we were talking about this. We were talking about the whole idea of, they can bring something forth from the dream into reality, right? The idea that the old gods might be trying to learn that trick. Well, what if that's all the reason that Mimiron's attempt to create goblins as a servitor race was corrupted by the old gods? Because we know it was. Maybe that's why. They wanted to learn how Mimiron did it. Why was Mimiron still here? And it all comes back to, they want to use it on Y'Shraj. They want to bring Y'Shraj back, not to lead them, but because he was so powerful that it took Aman'Thul himself to kill him.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's always been part of it is that I think there's always been a plan to try to bring Y'Shraj back. Now, looping back to the Hour of Twilight thing, just to
well, that's my thing, is I think that the Hour of Twilight, I think there's a way to make the idea that the Hour of Twilight, I don't think you want to erase the Hour of Twilight or say that wasn't really the Hour of Twilight. I think, however, you can make it work narratively by saying the Hour of Twilight was always intended for you to solve it.
Yeah, so that's kind of where I was going with it, is that I think the idea of the word Twilight, I think, is intentional, right? Because what is Twilight? Twilight is the light of the sky between full night and sunrise, or between sunset and full night. We've been always looking at it from the sunset to full night, but what if it has nothing to do with that? What if it has everything to do with the time between full night and the sunrise, which is essentially that cycle of rebirth, right? It's this idea of reconstruction or rebirth. That's usually what dawn means. And it doesn't necessarily have to be limited to what we've already seen. Now, I think there is some aspects that were already, and we've talked about this before, where I think there's some symbolism because of how it was described and how it was prophesized. Because yes, it was prophesized by somebody who served the old gods, but then also the dragons had visions of it. Because like Ysera saw this in her dream. And yes, we can talk about the Emerald Nightmare and how the dream was being corrupted, and that is certainly an aspect of it. But everything was that we saw in there was taken as very literal, and I don't know necessarily that it needed to be. But we talked about this before, where a lot of the stuff that was prophesized, or at least said that was going to happen, kind of already did, right? Like Ysera's death basically at the hands of her own power, that happened. That legitimately happened. Neltharion dying, his carcass impaled upon Wormrest Temple. While his carcass wasn't on Wormrest Temple, he sure died in that assault. We sure finished that fight, which started there, and took it down to the Maelstrom and beat him there. All of these, sorry, go ahead.
Well, we were talking about this before. You have to kind of look at it from the perspective of the way the old gods handled the word truth.
Yes, I was just going to, yep, that's exactly where I was going with it. Please continue.
Well, there's that whole concept of the best liar is somebody who never lies to you.
Mm-hmm.
The old gods don't lie. The things they say are true. I'm air quoting, but they're not true in a sense that there's no intent to tell you a falsehood, but there is every intent to lead you in a direction they want you to go. To call it manipulative is kind of an insult, because they're far beyond manipulation. They're straight up into mental mind games. You know, they're messing with your heads. Like literally, they are messing with their heads. And the heads in question are every head, every body, everything that could possibly be of use to them in their goal is gonna get used. So yeah, I don't think that the Hour of Twilight, like, it's not still the Hour of Twilight, but I do think the Hour of Twilight was exactly designed to lead us to where we are now.
Well, yeah, because I was going to say, think about the time. Well, I was going to say, think about the time we're in right now. What is happening?
Yeah. Lots of things happen. Go ahead. The
dragon aspects are being reborn, right? Essentially, they're getting their groove back. That's sort of the whole point of this expansion. Maybe not as aspects because we haven't finished the expansion out, but they're regaining their sense of self. They're taking up their mantle. But that seems to be the theme, is this theme of rebirth, and we're kind of already there. All these things that were prophesized happened. And what does that mean? What possibly could that mean for the future? But I think you're onto something, and I think you're right. And what I'm saying is, like, I agree with you that I think Y'Shaarj is sort of like the next logical, I don't want to say investment, but if anything was going to come back, or, if anything was going to be reformed, I think it could be Y'Shaarj. Maybe not necessarily as Y'Shaarj.
Yeah, maybe they're not going to bring him back because you can't, but they're going to restore to the Shah and use them for something. I don't know.
Or N'Zoth being gone through the re-origination process and having those very deep roots from Y'Shaarj that got left behind to sort of build upon. Maybe N'Zoth isn't the smallest one anymore. Again, consequence of our actions.
Yeah, there's lots of ways you could go down. It could, honestly, Il'gynoth was called the Corruptor. And we also know that the Ga'Hoon, who is the creature that was created when the Titans were studying the old gods, Ga'Hoon was like a disease, like an actual disease vector, because corruption and spreading are things the old gods do. I may am phrasing it. I just find myself thinking about this, like, in terms of what's, the whole idea of the Thousand Truths is to use information, not to, like, lying is easily dismissible. If you tell people lies and then they figure out that you were lying, they just ignore you.
Yep.
But if everything you say is always true in some fashion, it can be looked upon as factual. It's like they're not talking in riddles and being obscure because they're trying to make it fit what ends up happening. They're doing so to get you to think about it. They want you to decide what it means. because by doing that, to use the terms from Mass Effect of all things, you are using the technology that they devised. You're using the way they were thinking in your decision making. And once you start doing that, they have you. And it can work, like you were talking before about Yrel, it can work on beings like Yrel. It's entirely possible that Yrel is listening to the old gods right now.
Yeah.
Because they're not going to lie. They're not going to tell her anything that isn't true.
And we've already seen, again, Archbishop Benedictus is a great example. He was still able to wield the light as well as the void.
Absolutely. And if Yrel, like, I'm just imagining, remember everything that the Lightbound were saying when they were attacking the Maghar? That the Maghar did this? That the Maghar, what if it's all true? What if they were told that and shown that it was true? Maybe the Maghar didn't do it in the sense that they went out and said, we're going to blow up the planet. Maybe they just are responsible for it because the Iron Horde let Gul'dan, summon multiple demons into like Tanaan Jungle and essentially kickstarted the planet's slow death. Because that's what happened to our Draenor. Remember? When our Draenor was dying and Nuzul had to try to find a way off the planet, it was because they had brought in a ton of demons and a bunch of warlocks and everything was dying. Azeroth has something that Draenor didn't have. Azeroth has a world soul. That's why every time the Legion has shown up, Azeroth has reacted much in the way that like any organism would react when an existential threat is introduced to it, even plants. Like when something that can kill you is introduced, you react. And that has me thinking that the old gods, therefore, how is it the old gods were able to burrow into the world? How is it that the old gods were able to subvert parts of it? They can't be seen as a threat. And that's why they don't lie. Because lies indicate malice. Lies indicate, bad intentions. The old gods would argue up and down that the intentions they have are the best for everybody involved. And you can't prove them wrong. Because first off, because it's just an opinion, and secondly, because it doesn't. But they're telling you the truth. They are saying true things when they say that. Oh yeah, this is the best possible fate, non-existence for everybody. It's much better. It's much better than this horrible being alive and doing things thing. And you don't want to be dead and turned into like a battery for some like weird dimension. No. We're just going to make it so nobody exists. It's going to turn everybody into like pulsating goo and it just all be absorbed into the void. And then we'll just all be nothing. Doesn't that sound better? Totally sounds better to me. What about my friend here? And they'll keep approaching different ways to get this to happen because they have nothing but time. Because they don't die. Or live, or do anything. It is really an interesting concept to this idea of the old gods essentially being like the ultimate manifestation of what you were talking about. Because if you are a master of the void, if you're a master of nothing, your light isn't that complicated. Light will actually straight up tell you this is the way things are and nothing can change it. Whereas the old gods are like, no, absolutely everything can change at any moment. You can be happy and in love with your chosen one in one moment, and then you're alone and they're all dead, and you just have to feel the pain. That's existent. But we can make it better. We can just get rid of the pain entirely for everybody. Wouldn't that be better? So yeah, I definitely there's something to this I'm really liking. I find myself really interested in what Eridicon is doing now because he went and got the essence from Galakrond. And then like they did the whole Shadow Flame thing. He seems to have not really concerned himself with the Shadow Flame very much. He just let that to fire act.
Well, and that's the other thing too, right? Like looking at Eridicon, looking at his actions, he knew about it already. He didn't have to go into Aberrus, right? Like, did you notice that? This is before they went inside of Aberrus. He sent Firact to go do the thing. He literally said, go get this. He knew it was there. And some people are chalking that up to, he's just an earth elemental dragon. So very clearly he knew about it because he's the counterpoint to Neltharion. But I find that interesting. Like, why? Is it just because he's attuned to that element that he can talk to the old gods and find out that stuff? Because there are others that clearly can't or don't or won't. He's not the only one attuned to that. He's not the only one that can attune himself to it. If that was the case, when Thrall took on the mantle of Earth Warder for the temporary ceremony, when he filled in that position, he didn't hear any whispering, not really like that. He had doubt. He had, there was the whole, pain, doubt, and crippling fear that he felt internally. But I don't think it was ever said that it was like an old god assaulting him. Not really. But he also didn't gain instantaneous knowledge of all these places and all these things. Right.
That's an interesting point, man.
Thank you.
What does it feel like to be assaulted by an old god? What does it feel like when they talk to you? Does it always come as madness and pain and fear? Or can they talk to you in a pleasant, civilized way? N'Zoth, every time N'Zoth has spoken to us, N'Zoth has been nothing but pleasant.
Well, there's been exceptions where he flexes power.
Yeah, but he starts off diplomatically. When he first tells you about how he's chosen you, like he's, if anything, there's an alienness to him. He doesn't feel like he's a real good buddy or anything, but he does feel like he means what he's saying.
Yeah, which is true, and that, but that's not also the point that I'm trying to get at.
Go
here.
ahead with your point. I just want to come back to that whole idea of like what might be a terrifying ordeal for one person could actually be just like Thrall didn't have time to recognize that the old gods were talking to him because he was barely in the job for like 5 minutes.
Which is fair, but also Iridikron doesn't seem to be going mad, right? It's the idea of, was there an exchange of information, or
that's
or if there wasn't an exchange of information, what if it's something he just gleaned and something he knew about without their intervention, because he's seizing power essentially, or was it Xal'atath that reached out to him? Because Xal'atath, when we last saw them, was being freed from the prison of the blade that they were in and sort of sent off, like being told, you know what you got to go do it. What is that? What was that? Was it all about this? Was it about finding Iridikron? Was it about freeing the aspects? Is Xal'atath, or the aspects, the
primal ancients,
the primal incarnates, is Xal'atath the one that showed up in the Titan facility? Because very clearly that does not stop Xal'atath anymore, and we know that Void can reach those facilities because its order not really drastically opposed to Void, in that they didn't really care about that containment of it or prevention of it getting in. Is that something that she started that chain of events? And
well, we know that even before Xal'atath is freed from the blade, we know that the old gods can attack because the Legion attacked Ulduar. And that left them not able to do anything during Battle for Azeroth, except shut off the thing. Now we have to go back to finding going on at some point.
Really, 100%.
But you got me thinking though. What if the thing here is that what seems to us when looking at it from Neltharion as madness, as he went insane? What if that seems like Iridikron's getting saner? Because you just pointed out, Void isn't opposed directly to order. Void is opposed to light.
Yep.
Those are the cosmic forces in opposition. Void can impose order on you to get you to do what it wants.
And this has been something he's been doing for a while from the description of it. Like, Alex Straza and why can't I never remember the ice primal incarnate's name?
Yeah, Veranoth.
Veranoth. Even talk about like, these are his dark biddings. These are the deals that he's been making for eons or whatever the case is. Like, if you only knew the truth of the deals he was making, it's like, so was he already in bed with the old gods and Void beforehand? Was he able to hear whispers of Galakrond before all this other stuff happened? Because again, Galakrond is a wild card here.
Yeah.
We don't know how the rest of the dragons reacted to it outside of fear. And we do know that Galakrond was eating the dragons and spitting out necrotic babies, essentially. And those undead, weird necrotic babies were going through and just murdering dragons. And after everything was done, when he was put down, what was left behind? We see a little glimmer of that in the dungeon, though, too, right? Like, we fight essences of his corruption. We fight bits of him that aren't necessarily bits of him. And here's an interesting thing. Those bits jump into the corpses of dragons and then use those dragons.
Well, what did we find out at the end of Shadowlands when Kalia Menethil was talking to the person from Plaguey Place, whose name is escaping me at the moment? We find out that necromancy isn't powered necessarily by quote unquote death.
Mm-hmm.
Like necromancy is literally just using magic to, blur the line between living and dead. And any form of power can do it as long as it knows how to. And that's in part because of what Kalia herself is, that she is basically an undead, but not a Forsaken, but an undead powered by the light. The light is keeping her animate. And the light seems to have no trouble with that. The light doesn't balk at it. The light isn't like, ooh, this is oogie oogie bad. The reason that Zeliek's light burns the Forsaken is because the power that is animating the Forsaken is what? It's death magic.
Yep.
It's the power from the Shadowlands.
Yeah, and the interesting thing with Thalia is like she's more akin to a light forge than anything else, really.
Yeah, but at the same time, she is undead. She is
she was
like
dead.
Undead.
Yep.
And what do we know about the beings from the Shadowlands when exposed to the light? We know that it is not good for them.
Well, we know that at least for some of them, it's not.
Well, I mean, we know that when the Naru attack Revendreth, they sear the whole freaking place. And that's the thing. We're always talking about the light. We're talking about it in its positive aspects. How it reveals, dark. It splits darkness away from us and allows us to perceive the world and yada, yada, yada. But it wasn't until Shadowlands that we ever got a real idea that, or we can use a magnifying glass and burn you like ants with the power of the light. Because that light doesn't, light is why deserts are uninhabitable. Light is why, Venus is not a place you want to go on your vacation. Light is the only way that the power of the sun reaches us. Because nothing else from the sun, aside from like various particles of electromagnetic energy, can reach us through the vacuum between us and the sun. And that means that light is basically the primary force by which life on this planet even exists, but it's also what burns planets away, and they can't have any. It's that thing, that dichotomy, that void embraces. Void embraces that there are multiple facets to the truth. Light keeps trying to tell us that there's only one truth. But that's if there is only one truth, and you have to know what it is. You have to know the negative and positive aspects of a thing before you can really know what the truth of it is. And this whole thing, every time the thing about Galakrond, that's really getting to me, because his necromancy was not, it was void powered. It was the void, much like Kalia is the light.
Yeah.
Was he already dead? Was he an undead being at that point? And those dragons that he was eating, what was he doing to them? Was he just killing them, or was he consuming their life?
Yeah, because that's the other thing that we don't know, and maybe we'll get to a point where we see what that is. But, and this is a huge but, we don't know. We don't know that when Tyr experimented on Galakrond, if Galakrond was alive. We know that or that he didn't die first, and that's what they had to do with the corruption of him. That he had to be dead in order for the malfeasance to sort of take hold. Because, again, he's essentially being infused, and even if he drank from the corrupted font, if he's alive, would that have made him an undead monstrosity? Would that have made him essentially Plague V 1.0? Because that's what he really was. He was the original Scourge.
Well, you can make an argument that all the undead that we see on Azeroth that predate the Scourge might be because of him.
And because the essences and pieces of him left behind throughout the world.
Yeah. Because as you pointed out, they jumped into dragon bodies, but where there weren't dragon bodies, were they going to be like, well, I'm not going to jump into some elf. That's ridiculous. I'll just wait here.
Or maybe they did. Or maybe
they did.
Maybe they're the source of the actual gnome leprosy. Maybe they're the source of some of the original mutations of the Trogs. Maybe Trogs started as we know that they were supposedly a variant split of the Earthen race. What if they weren't? What if they were Earthen that died? That all of a sudden, some of this old god corruption that happened to be from Galakrond, which wasn't necessarily too far away from where they started life, just decided, well, that seems like a sturdy body. Let me pop into here. And then started a whole chain reaction. We don't know. We don't even know what happens if that stuff goes into a living body. Correct.
That doesn't die. Like, maybe it's pretty much like the, curse of flesh on steroids. Maybe that's why you get sudden rapid, maybe the reason that the Vrykul went from being, okay, we're made of flesh, but I'm like 12 feet tall, man. I'm tough. Whoop, now you're like 5 feet tall. Maybe that was, something like what happened to Galakrond. Because we know that the Winterscorn War takes place after Galakrond, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's this big deal in Northrend, involves the aspects. Why are the aspects involved in a war between Vrykul warlords?
That is a good question.
Tyr asked them to, because the Winterscorn were somehow working for Loken.
Because
right?
we know that the Vrykul, at least some of them, were all about Tyr's life, but apparently, but not all of them apparently.
No, we know some of them were working for Loken. He was calling himself the Prime Designate. And there were some Vrykul who were like, the Titans can't be trusted. They've turned their backs on us. So there's a lot of options there. But just think about the fact that the Winterscorn first come into prominence. They're working for Loken. And what are they doing? They're riding on proto-drakes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's apparently a big enough deal that the aspects get involved. Like, what if the Winterscorn War is nothing more and nothing less than, from the dragon perspective, it's the original war with the proto-drakes.
And part of that, I think, might filter into some of the hatred that the incarnates feel towards the dragonflights as well, potentially, because we still don't know if subjecting themselves to the Titans' experimentation is the only thing that they're mad about. Because some of the things that have hinted, or at least that they've said in cinematics or in exchanges, especially levied at Alexstrasza, is your decisions led us here. You ruined our people, essentially. And it never explicitly says only because you accepted the Titan's gift, but also because the Titan Watchers maybe waged war with the dragons involved in them and forced them to sort of almost enact their own civil war at the very beginning. Like, there's a lot of stuff there that is just awful. I mean, there's a lot of potential for reasons why, I guess you could say. But wow, we've kind of gone all over the place on this one. So
it's what you come for, folks.
It's true, but I don't know if there's anything else to add to it. How about you?
I mean,
we could
keep going, but we should probably let it go because it's like almost 5:30.
Yeah, I think we're gonna call it there, folks. Blizzard Watch is made possible due to the generous contributions at patreon.com/BlizzardWatch. Your continued support means this podcast site and community is able to thrive and grow. Blizzard Watch supporters enjoy exclusive benefits like early access to the podcast, a better chance at having your question answered on our podcast for the queue, and an ads-free site experience. Again, if you have questions for this or any of our podcasts, be sure to send those into podcast@blizzardwatch.com. If you can't hit us up on email, hit us up on Discord. If you are a Patreon subscriber, please go ahead and hit us up in the Patreon queue and podcast questions channel. And just let us know how to say your name. If you can't support us on Patreon, don't want to send us an email, you can also send in questions to the queue and podcast questions channel. We will look there as well. Just kind of help us out there. More questions mean more gooder. But I think that's going to do it. We're probably going to have some wild tinfoil hat episodes coming up in the near future, because I think Matt and I are both starting to spin a little bit, and I think the walls are going to start getting the pins with the red yarn going through them pretty soon.
That's primitive. You should use a whiteboard.
Yeah, but I want to reenact the Charlie Day. I am very much tactile. But
I'm all about, like, if I could, I would just have it be like an entire wall of screen.
Well, we're not going to Minority Report this. But with that, folks, we'll see you next week.